Well, I think we're going to have to do a little bit of a historical journey, a historical process, and understand how we got to where we are after the Enlightenment. We haven't talked about this in many years. It's always good to review. In fact, I would say since we've talked about this, we're not just talking about the cultural effects, not just toxic culture and TV and all that. No, I want to talk about the political ideologies that have evolved. And we haven't talked about this in many years, and we have, again, I probably have 100,000 subscribers since I've talked about this. So we're gonna go through some of that history, because I'm just once again smacked in the face and reminded, even after last night's reality stream, we wanted to be sober, and everybody was saying, "Hey man, you had the most sober, accurate analysis, and everything that I said yesterday came true today." So we want to talk a little bit again about what we want to expect, or what we should expect. Be ready for the crazy stuff that's going to come. Have accurate, realistic expectations about what it's even possible for the presidency to do. To remember everything that Cameron talked about in last night's video. Otherwise, we're really just setting ourselves up to be duped in this dupery game of the political process. And the political process, as we know of it, is itself a product of liberal civilization, enlightenment civilization. What do I mean? Elections, party politics. That itself is part of the Enlightenment heritage. Now, as you guys know, not everything that we've talked about and criticized, not everything Enlightenment is bad, but a lot of the Enlightenment is bad. And one or two of those things that come to mind are, just first and foremost, the absurdity of elections in general. I mean, this is just so silly if you stop and think about it on a national scale. Now, there's flexibility, I think, in terms of societies, how they want to govern themselves, what types of things they want to set up, for people groups determining their own destinies and their own futures. They don't have to all have the same forms of political expression or governance and so forth. So there's freedom and I guess you could say flexibility here. I think the forms themselves are almost always going to tend towards the hierarchical. There's never, ever, ever going to be any kind of really egalitarian style of society, utopia, whatever. It's just never, ever going to happen. For one, because it's contrary ultimately to the principles of nature themselves, in my view. You don't really see this in nature. I mean, people come up with sort of obscure, oh, there's this bug in the Amazon and they actually live in a... No, look, none of that really matters on the whole, because humans are not like bugs in this respect, or at least in regard to some bug that lives in some communal way, which probably doesn't even really exist. Humans tend towards appreciating successful paternal relationships. And I think this is the root of monarchy, is the idea that since family is so fundamental, and since humans are actually constituted to have essential realities, biological realities, the most natural form of government and governance in the human sphere will be some form of paternalism, paterfamilias, and monarchy. And so the family and a royal family becomes a kind of an icon or kind of an image that ideally the rest of the nation wants to emulate, wants to take pride in, etc., etc. Now, as we know, that doesn't always happen effectively in history. Certainly hierarchies can be abused and so forth. But the problem with leftism and the whole history of it is precisely, first and foremost, this equalitarian mistake. The idea that everyone is fundamentally identical, equal, and some kind of like manufactured unit, like a bunch of widgets coming out of a factory or something, right? And the reality is, of course, humans are born with different skill sets, different qualities, different abilities, already stamped into their very being, into their soul. Now that right there is a huge departure point for a lot of the modern world. And that's because leftism, liberalism, progressivism, etc., all the way back to the Enlightenment, are essentially premised, maybe not so much in the first stages of the Enlightenment per se, but they're really beginning with the assumptions of some elements of Greek philosophy, believe it or not. One of those elements of Greek philosophy that they start with is this idea that no man sins or does evil knowingly. And this is something that Plato, for example, was a proponent of. In this tradition, in its idea, in its notions, the only way that you would ever do something immoral has to be because you don't have enough facts. But of course, the problem with this is that it overlooks other means and reasons why humans might do evil actions. What if lack of knowledge is not the only reason that humans choose vice or choose evil? What if we're fallen? You see. So right away, there's a disconnect between a worldview that believes in fallen humanity versus, say, a Greek metaphysic or a Greek philosophy that doesn't believe in a fall. It just locates vice in a lack of proper education. And also in that view of the Greeks, there's no such thing as grace. And so really, again, all that's necessary is the right set of facts. And if you have the right set of facts, then you will choose the good. But not everybody wants the good. What if people are, in some cases, absolutely malicious? What about the evil genius? I mean, the evil genius has presumably not just all the facts, but many more facts available beyond everyone else. And if you read something like Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground, you get an idea of this kind of line of argumentation to refute the Greek notion of evil really just being located in man's ignorance. What if it's not an intellectual problem, but rather an issue of the heart? And that's really where Orthodox Christianity really departs from the Hellenic Greek ideas. Now, in the Enlightenment, we get a return in many ways to Greek philosophical pagan traditions. Not in total, and I don't mean the more superstitious metaphysical aspects of Greek metaphysics. Rather, a return to, as Peter Gay called it in his famous books, Enlightenment paganism, or Greek rationalism. And this is not surprising. Of course, the Enlightenment, many of those characters are reacting to superstitious Roman Catholic excesses, abuses, theological errors, many of which I would agree with. Now, some of those mistakes had already been called out by the Reformation, right? So, when we talk about the excessive and bizarre views of the supererogation of the merits of the saints, all kinds of weird ideas about female spiritual mystical piety, scrupulosity, etc., etc. All of these things that you see Luther and Calvin and other people whining and fussing about, some of which have basis in reality. The extreme then is to go all the way. This is just what humans do. They swing all the way to the other opposite. When sometimes, many cases, maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. And so modern leftism really cannot be understood or divorced from the idea of, as we said, first and foremost, locating all of man's problems, not in anything internal per se in terms of the heart, but rather in education up here, intellect, and in the fact that there is no nature which would have anything to do with man. having these vices or so forth. In other words, in the nature versus nurture debate, it's all nurture, right? Think of the most common leftist kind of, oh, people in the ghetto, they only rob or steal because of poverty. Oh, they only do these things because of poverty. And if we could just cure poverty, what, suddenly we would have people acting virtuously? This is so dumb, right? But this is a lot of really stupid people believe this. They think that there's a necessary connection between curing poverty that will then lead to virtue. And yet the same people turn around and point out that the wealthy people are the wicked people. But wait a minute. So I thought you just said that curing poverty would create virtuous ghetto citizens. And yet when you talk about wealthy people, they become a class of oppressors, the very root and source supposedly of many or most social ills. Then, as you can imagine, leftism is also premised on this idea that more and more and more education, hence great society, hence welfare programs, hence state-funded drug programs, and on, all of this education is what will somehow cause the virtue and the good actions of the citizens. But that itself presupposes a kind of blank slate tabula rasa human nature, which is precisely what we're talking about. And the idea is well, since man, we know post-enlightenment is just a piece of putty to be molded, stamped, and formed by society. There's nothing innate. There's no innate human nature. There's no innate soul. There are no characteristics stamped on the person from God. They're just products of their environment or of nature itself, the products of blind random processes, you see. And so the idea then becomes to form and to create and to mold the perfect man, the right man, the man of the future, the new man, as the Marxists and communists later talk about, right? The Soviet man, etc. It's essentially the creation of the perfect external environment which can tweak and manipulate the stimuli to produce the effect that they want, to produce the being that they want. Again, all operating on the assumption that there's not a soul, or that there's not a principle within man given by God or something like that that makes him a unique being. Again, everything is pretty much nurture. Now, that's not to say that there aren't, haven't been phases of, say, atheist, materialist type people who believed in, no, it's everything is nature, not nurture, right? So that you can fall on two sides of that extreme there. But in this regard, no, we're saying that there's only really, in modern progressivism, the assumption, for the most part, that the solving of man's ills comes about through tweaking and fixing the external, the social order out there, and not really anything to do in here. Except that at times they also do fall back on the sort of genetic determinism, perhaps more so amongst the academic, psychological, or technocratic elite, right? Which believe that, no, actually we can tweak man and fix man internally through transhumanism, microchips, genetic DNA manipulation, etc. So sometimes they do sort of switch over into this genetic determinist type of camp, and this would be maybe more so Malthusian-minded people. But those people are not in the majority when it comes to the left, right? That's very much the minority of people on the left, right? People like Hans Eysenck and people like that who have been in trouble for scientific publications and discoveries that go against the mainstream liberal orthodoxy of so-called scientism and psychology and whatever. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying that Hans Eysenck is necessarily therefore all correct in all of his eugenics and Malthusian ideas. I'm just pointing out that those just tend to be the minority amongst liberal academia. So the nature versus nurture debate, I think, pretty much ended up being almost wholly dominated by the left, siding with the idea that everything is essentially an environmental, external, nurturing stimuli, and hence the assumption that all of these, external means and programs can somehow tweak and fix man. And this is what undergirds even public education. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't believe in educating the populace, but I don't know that means that I don't think that means that the state or the federal government should be in charge of educating the population. There are plenty of private organizations, religious organizations, etc., that I'm sure could do a far better job of educating than some sort of, gigantic federal, whatever Soviet-minded program that's literally copied from the Prussian socialist model of public education. So, as we're, speaking about the Enlightenment and the revolution and those characters, one thing that we should keep in mind is the oddball nature of the individuals in the French Revolution. Thank you guys for those super chats. If you guys would hit like and share. We got 1,000 live and only 257 likes. You guys don't. I thought this is what you guys want. Isn't this what you want? Of course, it's what you want. And now, my sources for this are not just from Fire in the Minds of Men, but Fire in the Minds of Men is probably overall the best encapsulation of what we're talking about in this first part of tonight's talk, and that's the early revolutionary phases of the mindset of the left, the psychology and spirituality, so-called, of the left, because we're gonna say, I think, that leftism is really a spiritual disease and delusion.